to David's Walk into a Bar is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
And now, let's gaze into the future. On the Disney Channel.
Hi, Mousercisers!
Mousercise. Join the parade and feel good all over with Kellen and Mickey. Mickey and his friends are waiting for you. Now available at your authorized Walt Disney home video dealer.
High five for a death and alive. Knocking the plastic like a man from a Catskills. High five for a death and alive. Knocking the plastic like a man from a Catskills.
Hello, this is David Anderson. We're going to be talking about Disney and all of its permutations in home video. I am here, of course, with David Lawler. How are you doing, Mr. Lawler?
I'm fine.
And I'm also here with a special guest star, Mr. Geno Cuddy. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How are you?
I am well. Okay, we're ready to go. We're going to be talking about like all kinds of Disney stuff and their early times in home video and how they got started. I'm assuming we're going to talk about them suing until they decided to actually start making money at some point.
Speaking of money, I have one statement for the both of you.
Yes.
$55.632 billion in 2016. That's how much money Disney made.
Wow.
I believe it.
This company is a monster. It is taking over the world. It shows no signs of stopping. I think that the plan, we talked last or 2 weeks ago, we talked about MGM, right?
Mm-hmm.
MGM's model now is just to buy libraries. And I think if MGM, which is a survivor, it may become housed within a one-bedroom or studio apartment in New York, but I think that the future is going to be Disney and MGM until Disney buys MGM, of course.
Did you hear that MGM just started up the Orion Pictures Corporation again?
Oh,
nice.
Wow. So they're going to actually be released. They're going to be their nice, like, small studio.
Are we going to see those
releases.
stars again in the galaxy?
Why didn't they just maybe? Why I don't know why they didn't just bring back United Artists. If they're going to do like a small company, bring back United Artists. Really, come on.
Now, okay, I did a little arithmetic. I'm not that good on math, but the operating income of Disney is $15.721 billion. Their net income was $9.391 billion, which means a lot of that money is going back into the company.
Yeah, it's all Star Wars and Marvel.
Yeah. Total assets $92.033 billion. And their equity is $47 billion.
Parks. It's
and they
theme
only
parks.
have 200,000 employees. Can you imagine 200,000 employees and you're making that kind of money?
It's theme parks.
Yeah.
That's where they make a lot of their money.
Let's start off with there was a short film called Alice's Wonderland. This is early 1923, Kansas City, Missouri. Walt Disney was a part-time animator, part-time watch repairman, something like that. He creates a little short film called Alice's Wonderland, and he does it on his own equipment. He's got his own rigged-up little system in an extra room in a tiny house. He brought in this child actress named Virginia Davis who interacts with animated characters. So it's sort of a combination of live action and animation.
Well, let me get into a little bit of that, if I may, please. That actually was not the first instance of combining live action and animation. That idea had been perfected many, many years before. It's funny, okay? I know we're talking about Disney, but I have to, set the record straight on a lot of things. And Max Fleischer actually devised a lot of what you see in animation today, as he was the first one to patent the use of live action and animation in cartoons with his fabulous Out of the Inkwell series. And he was also the first one to create sound cartoons years before Disney did anything with like Steamboat Willie and all that. Max Fleischer had what he called song cartoons, which is actually an idea that Disney lifted in the late 80s. They would basically have cartoon footage and such while you would follow a bouncing ball and sing along with whatever song was playing in the background. Now, my memory is escaping me. His first, I think before he did the Alice film, he had actually done some earlier cartoon shorts, which were basically adaptations of classic fairy tales, and they were called Laughograms.
Well, this was made for something called Laugh-O-Gram Studios. Those other things, these were part of the distribution package that he had with some, what was it, M.J. Winkler Productions. Max Fleischer had a bigger budget though to work with, but Disney had 4 animators, key animators, working on it for a lot less money because a lot of the equipment that it was made on was of his own design. So, but with Fleischer had more of a staff. He had more money. He wasn't. Also, Disney wasn't really paid as much. He was like paid $1,500, I think.
Even though he was distributing his films through the Bray Studios, I guess technically yes, you could say that.
They brought in Disney as a production partner, but Walt, with his brother Roy, formed Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio that same year, and they continued to make these animated movies. And then they built their own studio finally in 1926, which was then changed to, the name was changed to Walt Disney Studio. So, and then, okay, this is weird. Did you know this, Geno, that there was a character that's very much a precursor to Mickey Mouse, but not a mouse. He's a
Oswald.
rabbit. He's Oswald. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit.
Yep.
Which, if you look at it, it looks like an early Mickey Mouse just with long ears.
Correct, and there's some very famous shorts. There are, I think, Trolley Troubles. Some of them, I think, are lost. But yeah, there was Trolley Troubles. There was one cartoon where he was a dad. And a lot of, I think, now, I have a friend, his name is Kyle J. Ostrom, and he can correct me if I'm wrong on a lot of this stuff. A lot of, I think, the Oswald cartoons, I think, later got recycled into being Mickey Mouse cartoons.
What they do, just cut his ears off a little bit?
Yeah, well, let me take a look at some of the filmography here real quick. Yeah, there was Poor Papa, Trolley Troubles, The Mechanical Cow, Great Guns, and a lot of these cartoons were later reissued by Walter Lantz. In, I believe, the late 30s, early 40s. And, of course, Walter Lantz being most famous for being the creator of Woody Woodpecker. And I believe Andy Panda as well.
So, unfortunately, though, because the Oswald stuff was being distributed by a different company, that Winkler Pictures we talked about, through Universal, Disney didn't make much money. Walt himself didn't make much money. He made 26 of these shorts before the contract was lost, because I guess the woman Margaret Winkler, who ran Winkler's production company, her husband took it over, and they tried to buy the Disney studio, I guess, maybe in a hostile takeover situation, but they couldn't do it. So what he did was he just he lured away Disney's animators, I guess, with more money, to start his own animation studio, which is called Snappy Comedies, which is a hilarious name. It sounds so 1928. It's a snappy comedy, you see.
I never heard of that.
I never heard of snappy comedies either. But we're snappy, damn it! This is when Disney's like, all right, screw you guys, I'm going home. So he picks up his toys and... So he spends the next 3 years after that working on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which became the first, full-on Disney animated motion picture in feature-length running time. And it premiered in December of 1937, became the highest-grossing film ever until 1939, which we know what happened in 1939.
What was it released? What company released it, though? I mean, was it released
It was released by RKO.
Yeah,
which handled distribution of Disney's movies, after United Artists tried to get the rights to it. So United Artists, even back then, United Artists
Disney
was trying
and
to do
United
that.
Artists could have been one company, and then they never would have been bought by MGM. Or maybe
and I believe a lot of the early Disney cartoons were also distributed by Columbia as well.
Yeah,
interesting. I did not know that.
And the films that he did produce during that time were pretty much what we in the Disney animation community have coined package features, which were essentially feature films strung together from short films, featurettes, Famous examples of these would be Make My Music, The Adventures of Mr. Ichabod, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Then there were, I think even Three Caballeros, Saludos Amigos, a lot of those films from around that time. And they also, probably one of their more interesting films that they made around this time was a live-action animated treat entitled The Reluctant Dragon, which starred contemporary humorist Robert Benchley, in which Benchley roams the halls of the Disney studio in order to sell Walt Disney on the idea of the story.
Robert
that he had
Benchley,
read.
a member
Right.
of the Algonquin Round Table with Dorothy Parker, also the father of novelist Peter Benchley, who wrote Jaws.
Correct. And so that was probably one of their more interesting films. And yeah, a lot of animation talent did go over to the war. Getting back to Max Fleischer, one of his
And a lot of them
animation-
didn't come back either.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Willard Bowski, one of the finest animation talents the world has ever known, died at the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow.
And that was a very sad loss there. He of course worked for Fleischer, but very, very sad loss there. And he was a great worker.
All right, let's get into the classic period of the animation of Walt Disney. This is a point I wanted to bring up. I was talking to Bronwyn about it earlier. I don't know that Generation Xers embrace classic Disney as much as any other generation. There's a gap in the generations between baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. And I think it's because Disney was practically a non-entity when we were growing up, me and David. They had a cable channel. That's mainly what I remember Disney for, as well as.
Well, here's what I remember Disney. Okay.
Well, wait. As far as and also the live action movies, like there were some
that's
live
what
action.
I was going to say.
movies,
Like
right.
I thought of when I thought Disney, I thought of like Herbie Goes Bananas,
Yeah, the Love Bug, that kind of stuff.
Love Bug, and then their Disney show that they had on like I think it was on ABC at the time.
The
It
Wonderful
was
World of Color?
Wonderful World of Disney is what by then it was just Wonderful World of Disney, and it was a lot of whatever it is that like a lot of the like Goofy cartoons and Mickey Mouse cartoons, and it was like all their older stuff edited together, but it wasn't like their movies or anything like that, and they certainly weren't the Disney that they are today.
Yes, that's true.
They're kind of just like a big animation studio that made like kind of kids movies, and that's it.
Right.
Now-
Well, the only thing that I can remember specifically from my time period was the Black Cauldron, and I talked about that with you. And this was an animated movie. It was an attempt by Disney to get back into animation in the mid '80s. They spent a lot of money on the movie. I do remember seeing it, and I also remember my mother taking me to re-releases of both Dumbo and Peter Pan, which are probably my two favorite of Disney animated pieces. But is it also, and I want to ask you this, Geno, because you're of a different age group, you were beginning to really explore Disney at a time when it was resurging, where they successfully brought back their animation with movies like Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame, all that stuff. Is it possible that you were able to embrace that more because it was actually happening during your time period? By the time those movies came out, me and David were already we were pushing 20, and so we were.
By the time the Disney that we know today, it wasn't really even aimed at us.
Yeah,
because we were just too old.
My girlfriends actually love those movies. I didn't really care.
Women love this stuff. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I know.
They can be older, and they're like, Disney.
My aunt used to record old Disney Channel from like way back in the day, late 80s, early 90s, and gosh darn it, I wish I still had those tapes. Because on one of those tapes, I remember one of the best nights of television. It was the world premiere of DuckTales the movie, Treasure the Lost Lamp, which is now probably my favorite Disney film of all time. This big nostalgic favorite for me. And then after that, it was Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Ghostbusters 2, all on one night. So it's like, why the hell did I save that stuff?
Was that on the Disney Channel?
Yes.
So, okay, let me ask you, were they edited for content?
Probably. They probably hooked out all the hells and dams. Ghostbusters 2, it doesn't have a lot of bad words in it, and it's
there are a
it's more
couple.
just,
there's a couple.
There's a couple. They probably just trimmed it, would be my guess.
If I remember
correctly, they did do that. and it was a premium channel, from what I understand. For
It
a long
was
time,
until
right?
it wasn't. It was until about like the mid '80s, and then they started putting commercials on things.
Right,
Like,
right.
So they could like have more content. It was more. They bumped it down to like a regular cable channel and put commercials on it. Say like mid '90s, probably before Geno was even born. Would be
Right.
my guess.
Yeah,
Right.
I think by the mid '90s they were transitioning into that basic cable status. There's also, quite hilariously enough, footage of me, as a little baby, with my sister, and we were watching the Masterpiece edition of Pocahontas on VHS. And my mom
also, yeah.
Yeah, and my mom always loves to chide me about that because here's a funny story. As a kid, I always envisioned myself as John Smith, and I had a big crush on Pocahontas as a little kid.
Yes,
so
yes,
I-
yes. Can I just mention before you go on?
Go
I
ahead.
always thought she was hot. I
Yeah.
always thought she was hot. I mean, I think she's the hottest of all of them.
Remember, guys, this is just a cartoon.
I
Remember
know
this,
it's a
okay?
cartoon, but she's
It's just a
hot.
cartoon. Not-
Hey,
not
She's
a
so
woman.
voluptuous.
Not a
Have you
real
seen
woman.
her boobs? I mean, Jesus.
Hey,
Not really.
so is Jessica Rabbit, but look at guys to still make fan art of her.
Oh, but
And-
yeah, you know what, Jessica
and
Rabbit
it's kind
though.
of creepy and weird when they do that. I'm just
The-
saying.
the
you
problem
Yeah,
with
it
Jessica
is.
Rabbit
Kids,
is
don't ever. I gotta say this little PSA, kids. If you happen to stumble on a website named DeviantArt, run, run.
Okay,
The
that's
art
really
is quite
disturbing
deviant.
because my daughter goes to
Brain.
DeviantArt all the time.
Yeah.
Both my daughter and my wife go to DeviantArt quite a bit because they're artists. But Jessica Rabbit never worked for me because I thought she was just putting it on a little too much. I don't like it when even an animated woman is a little too. I like to find the sexuality, if you know what I mean.
So I had that tape of DuckTales the movie, and that essentially became my favorite Disney my favorite Disney animated film. I know, yes, it is flawed, but gosh darn it, I still love it. As a matter of fact, and we have a video we're going to show a little later, and you're going to see my voluminous amounts of copies I have of that. And so it's possibly my favorite animated Disney film, even though it's not really in the animated classics canon.
Though they did have a TV show, and I do remember. I can't speak for David, but I remember my freshman year of high school. I always ran home and tried to watch the two things that they showed, which were DuckTales and Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers.
Part
Used
of
to
the
love
Disney,
those.
part of the Disney afternoon, yes, a wonderful block, which also consisted of, I believe, later.
I found them very clever. I mean, they were very clever.
Yes.
They weren't like
They
like
were-
a lot of
yeah,
cartoons were.
Yeah, they weren't pandering to kids. You know, they were actually full-blown adventures. And,
I never really watched those. I think I was watching the real Ghostbusters. And
That
things like
came on after. That came
that
on
was
after
after?
those shows, yeah. But it was on the same channel and where I was living. Yeah.
I'm getting my like childhood years. I was probably just
What?
watching Star Wars over and over again. That's probably what I was doing.
You
but
ready?
okay, let's roll this video.
All right, in 3, 2, 1, click.
Okay.
All right, lovely DuckTales movie poster in the background. That's actually the first Disney VHS ever put out, Pete's Dragon. That was one of the Photomat titles. There were, I think, about 10 or so titles that Disney sent to Photomat. They were rental only for Photomat.
Yeah.
And so...
But this is a regular. That's a regular Disney title. That's not the Photomat version, is it?
Sadly, it's not. I would love to track those down someday. Apparently, they would be in these blue rental cases. They would just say Walt Disney Home Video. See, there's the original
Dumbo,
VHS
alright.
release of Dumbo. Now, here's a story for you. There's a reason why the Disney animated films weren't released on home video, and that's because the main studio heads at Disney thought that they would take away from theatrical revenue. But the exceptions to the rule were Dumbo and Alice in Wonderland because they had already been shown on the Disneyland anthology television series back in the 50s. And they weren't really Walt's favorite films, so those were the only two golden era.
Yeah,
Disney
Dumbo
films
was
to be
actually.
released.
I remember Dumbo being on regular NBC television in the mid '80s. I remember
Right.
that.
And another one of the titles that was released was Alice in Wonderland.
Oh,
Here's one.
Cue
Here's
your
the-
Cosby,
impersonation.
and the devil that Max Devlin because he's Bill Cosby.
And Elliot
Uh,
Gould.
I love that film, Devil Max Devlin. It's one of those forgotten live-action Disney films. That was actually one of the many films that The Black Hole and Condor Man were the three films that made Disney start their touchstone
brand. Yes,
venture.
yes.
To create films that were for more mature audiences. Now, something that, that's one of the Photomat titles, On Vacation with Mickey Mouse and Friends. Those were cartoon compilations that, centered on a central theme.
Look
like
at that.
there's theatrical shorts that were compiled together. And something very interesting about those is that on the labels of many of them, they say for sale only, not intended for rental. And that's because there were rental-only versions and sale-only versions. The rental-only versions would come in those blue cases. And the for sale versions would, of course, come in those big, thick, heavy clamshells that if you hit your brother on the head, you'd probably give him a good concussion.
Yeah.
And here's the Black Hole. Now, this title is interesting. The reason why I showed this was because this is actually my only for rental only copy, for rental only tape I have. Now, later on, they would take their for rental only tapes and they would market them back for sale, and they would have usually a red sticker going across one of the VHS windows saying used quality cassette now intended for sale only. So they would actually be released back.
Oh, there's a later release, Dumbo.
Yeah.
Yes, that's one from the first wave of the classics line, and those would come in nice, thick, heavy black clamshells. And that release was sort of like an afterthought because the mastering on that tape isn't really that good.
Is that a black diamond? That's a black diamond, right? Yeah.
Yes, and so there's actually is a classics logo for Dumbo.
There's
and,
Pinocchio.
Yes. Now, I've actually seen a very rare promo tape for Pinocchio where they actually have a Classics diamond on a microphone and they're going around interviewing people and they're promoting the Classics line and they're showing. And they had Maxwell ran a contest for if you won this contest, you would not only get a Disney vacation, but you would get 2 endless libraries of Disney videotapes. I love. Yes. Now that was the first Classics title. And the reason for that is because when they finally decided to release their Classics titles, there's the original price, $79.95. When they decided to release their Classics titles, they wanted to release a title that wasn't as risky. So they had decided to go with Robin Hood because while it was a good film, it wasn't that big at the box office.
Right. Yeah.
They eased in with their slightly less popular releases, and then they started releasing the bigger ones later when they realized they could make so much money.
Yeah. Now here's 2 copies of Dumbo. Now we Disney video collectors collect these because we go for those slight little differences. There are 2 different labels for that one, meaning that they were printed at 2 different times from 2 different ways. Same cover art, of course, but they would have 2 different print dates on them. Now here's a later release. In the late 80s, Disney had reprinted their older titles. And this tape actually has the older 1984 mastering on it. And they wound up correcting that error later on with tape from 1991. And you could always tell the earlier printing from the later printing because the later printing had an ink label like the one that you see there.
Yes.
And so that's why I have 2 of those. And I want to clarify that cover and that release was not banned. It just went into moratorium rather quickly because Disney wanted to still cash in on that title and theatrically.
Wait, is that the cover with the penis on it?
Yes. Okay. Now here's a rare cover. Now here's a rare variant because this actually has a sticker label. There are many variants that don't have sticker labels.
Yeah, I was going to mention that they started kind of in the mid '90s, just stamping the things on as opposed to just putting a sticker on. I guess it was cheaper.
Yeah, promo stuff. That was actually a very early version of the Peter Pan video cover, and they actually went with a very different design for the final product.
Jungle Book.
Yeah, and that's still new in sale too, $24.99. And
that was a massive hit. Throughout every time it would when it came out originally, it was a big hit, and then they re-release it as a big hit, and then so this is a major release.
Caldor, I bought it at Caldor.
Oh, can I mention very quickly, when Little Mermaid came out on VHS, I was working at Blockbuster Video. We had an enormous display, and those flew off the shelves.
Yeah.
Okay, Bonkers, whatever. I never heard of Bonkers.
That was a later Disney Afternoon series. It was basically sort of almost like another version of Roger Rabbit, where a toon cop wound up interacting with a real life cop, but the real life cop, ironically enough, was still a cartoon. One of their less successful series, but it's still highly regarded, and it's a cult classic today with Disney television animation fans. Now, here's a Bug's Life, and the reason why I showed this is because they actually made multiple covers, and there are the characters that appeared on the various covers. So, like, there would be a cover with Flick, there would be a cover with Heimlich, but that Hopper variant that I'm showing is actually the most rare variant you could find. Not many of those sold because, of course, he was the villain of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
And there's my favorite. It's very funny. This tape, Fearless Fortune Hunter, and another tape, which I think I'll show, Duck to the Future, those two tapes and DuckTales the movie, I actually rented those from an old video store called Video One in New Britain. It was in a Stop and Shop plaza.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that I remember going in there, and I remember the video card they would have would be on pink cardstock, and they would have two pictures of Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny on either side, and they would list all their titles and stuff. It was very, very cool. I wish I still had one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to love renting those tapes. And yep, there's the Duck to the Future tape. I still love watching DuckTales on the old VHS tapes, because it's just like, that was back when they were new and everything, and it just recreates that charm.
Oh, that's Leonard Part 6. Okay, this is driving me nuts. There's a Leonard Part 6 poster right over there. What's the other poster on the other side?
That's also another Leonard Part 6 poster.
Oh, okay.
DuckTales movie, Treasure the Lost Lamp, of course, my favorite Disney film of all time, my favorite Disney animated film. Now, wait till you see how many copies of this thing I have. I have so many copies of this because I'm such a crazy man.
Oh, my God.
Now, do you have this film on, say, DVD or any other format?
Oh, The Rescuers Down Under, one of the rare, I think, movies from the 70s. No, that wasn't from the 70s. The Rescuers.
87, I think.
The original Rescuers was in the 70s, right?
Original Rescuers was 70s.
Now, here's the interesting thing. They actually released Rescuers Down Under on tape first before The Rescuers. This came later on VHS.
Interesting.
So that's why I showed that off, because I thought that was rather interesting. And this contains the Emmy-winning song there. So I thought that was interesting that they released the sequel on tape first before they released the original. I don't think I could think of any other instance in which that was done. Maybe you guys can think of that, but I can't think of any other case where that was done. And here's a beautiful thing. I used to love when they used to make these big deluxe edition things. Like, they would package them, and they would be in these huge, like, cases. So this is like my deluxe edition of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Please forgive my horrible bed. I forgot to make it that day. So here's everything that you would get in this, and it was great. You would get the book. That's a beautifully nice book that tells you everything of how they made it. Oh, there's my Groucho Marx tape. So you would have like all these facts and information written in there. Then you would get a certificate of authenticity signed by Roy E. Disney himself with a little stamp of seal of approval. Then in here would be little lithograph posters from the film, like reproductions. And then, of course, those two tapes are still sealed. The Masterpiece Collection of Snow White, which was actually, that had been the first time that was ever released on home video.
Wait, can I ask you, at the time, how much would this have cost?
This whole thing, probably around $60 or $90.
Oh, okay.
I have another one for Fantasia that actually contains the original soundtrack, which is pretty cool. And I got to convert that soundtrack somehow because I want to be listening to that on my iPod, because you know what? I love the soundtrack to Fantasia. And that's the only time in which I believe that Toccata and Fugue had ever been done as a full-on orchestration piece, full-on orchestration piece, whereas it had usually been done as a organ piece.
Oh, that looks like a Japanese release.
It is a Japanese release of Mickey's Christmas Carol. It does work on my VCR, funnily enough. So I actually have seen what's on there.
And the funny thing is, I think the original U.S. release of Mickey's Christmas Carol was not in like a big clamshell thing. I think it was in a regular standard-sized box. Disney did that for a little while, like in the mid-'80s. They came out in a standard-sized box.
I actually do have a version of Mickey's Christmas Carol in a big, massive clamshell from the early '80s.
Yeah, it was more like that, like the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It was more like that. For some movies, some Disney movies, then later they all just went clamshell because they realized it was all going to kids. So
yeah, well, I actually do have
thrown around.
I do have a big clamshell of Mickey's Christmas Carol from the early '80s. So they actually did release it in a big clamshell. Now, I have the original screener tape of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids there. $1 Million Sell-Through title, how sweet it is, and it tells you all the... And it's interesting when you pop the tape in and you see all the promotional stuff that they had for it. in demo tape, not for sale or rental.
Oh, is that like a
it's
screener? Is that a screener like for?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
All right, gotcha.
So I'm glad to have that. Oh, I have to end it with my favorite Disney live action film of all time. I love First Kid, probably my favorite comedy of theirs. You know, because that's when I grew up in the 90s. So
you don't have the one where Sinbad is the genie? You don't have that one?
Dude, that never fucking existed.
No. Sinbad wasn't it? That was Shazam, is what you're thinking of, right? All right. Okay, that was really a lot of fun to look at. That's fantastic.
Great, we ended on a big like fuck you to Dave. Fuck you.
I want to get into, since we're getting into the 80s, I can talk about my wheelhouse as far as Disney. This was around the time, I want to say, what, 1985, 1986. When you mentioned the beginning of Touchstone, right? When was that?
85.
Okay,
with
85.
like my science project and I think it was my science project was the first Touchstone movie.
Now,
and
Touchstone,
then Splash,
okay.
right?
Splash was 84. Splash was 84. That was Touchstone. You're right.
Yeah, okay. Now, Touchstone, oh, by the way, it's based on a character from Shakespeare. I believe it's As You Like It, the character of Touchstone, who was like the comic relief. So Touchstone and this other one, Hollywood Pictures, they were not actual production companies. They were just brands, and they were made under the auspices of a company called Buena Vista. Buena Vista
Wasn't Buena Vista kind of like it was Disney, but just not in name, and then they just released
not
their
in
own
name, yeah, like a movie like Midnight Madness, remember, from 1980.
Yeah.
Released by Buena Vista. It basically kind of like a live action thing that adults and children would appeal to. But then after that, in the mid 80s, you have the companies like Touchstone and Hollywood that are just brands and basically releasing movies
like
for adults.
The Disney movies were released through Buena Vista releasing for a while. But remember, like one of the Disney places is literally like on Lake Buena Vista, and that's probably how they got the name.
Yeah, there you go. What I remember most was that there was a really incredible time where Disney was producing movies for adults. Two movies that really stick out for me that were constantly being played on my videotape machine were Down and Out in Beverly Hills, directed by Paul Mazursky, starring Richard Dreyfuss, Nick Nolte, Bette Midler, and a few other people. Little Richard, I believe, is in that movie toward the end. And the other one is Ruthless People, which I love that movie so much.
How about a little bit later, Stakeout?
Stakeout and another Stakeout. And also getting into 1990, what became, for the time, one of the biggest box office hits of an R-rated film, Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
Which still actually it's made over $400 million worldwide. And it's the only, I looked it up on Box Office Mojo. It is the only R-rated Disney-produced movie to have made that much money. It's like the highest of them all. The rest of them are all the movies that are, around these days, actually.
Because as we all know, all prostitutes look like a young Julia Roberts.
yeah, they certainly do.
She was pretty hot in that movie, though. I gotta give
and
her
all
that.
Johns look like Richard Gere.
Yeah.
Well, hey, it's better than the movie she made with Nick Nolte.
Oh yeah, I Love Trouble.
I Love Trouble. Yes.
Now that it's a movie like that it was an enormous box office hit. It was a movie that both men and women enjoyed, and it became a big hit because of that. Gary Marshall directed it. Very talented filmmaker. He's no longer with us. He died last year, I believe, in July.
He was also known for his work on The Odd Couple too, which I loved.
The Odd Couple, Happy Days. He was a writer on the Dick Van Dyke Show, Laverne and Shirley. I always thought he was a wonderful
Jason
filmmaker.
Alexander is in that movie too. He plays one of the Johns that
That's right, yeah.
flips out, I think.
Yeah. Right after he got the Seinfeld gig, actually appeared in that movie. The thing about Gary Marshall, I've always enjoyed his work on to a certain point. He's very much like a crowd pleasing type of filmmaker, and he's directed many hit movies, including Beaches and what's that other one? Runaway Bride, another big hit.
Mm-hmm.
And he's
not
made,
at Disney. That was at Paramount.
Yeah. But he's made a lot of money. But really, my favorite of his, I think, has to be Young Doctors in Love, which was his first movie as a director. But I just thought that was really just a wonderful movie. But Pretty Woman unleashed Julia Roberts on us, and she's still with us.
Yeah.
And also
her cackly laugh that we have to deal with.
Hey, I take her laugh over Fran Drescher's any day.
Now, let's move into this insane, what has Disney become? It has become incredibly big. I mean, it is just amazing.
Too big, I think, for its own good, I think.
For now, you have The Force Awakens as the #1 box office draw.
Yeah, but you know what? I miss when Disney used to go out and make their own movies. I mean, you know, I don't consider Force Awakens and all that. Yes, they have the Disney logo at the beginning, but I don't really consider them full-blown Disney films because those aren't Disney properties per se. Those are properties of Lucasfilm and all that and everything else, you know?
Yeah, I think they just kind of give them. I think they just kind of give them money now that they're like owned by Disney. They just say, "Go make your movie, you do it." I mean,
and I guess it's to rule out any hopes of a Black Hole remake or sequel.
Well, it could happen. You never know. I mean, they did it with Tron.
But what do you see as happening? Because I felt that in the 80s, Disney was trying to embrace adult audiences by bringing them in to see those movies that I mentioned earlier. And now they seem to have gone the other way because there's nothing else on this list that is for adults. Essentially, I mean, there's some intense PG-13 stuff, obviously, like Captain America: Civil War, which I've read is just about as violent as an R-rated movie from the 80s might have been. But it's kind of like less intense for being like a
Well, it's kind of like
PG-13
the way
kind
that
of
they
thing.
do with the James Bond movies of it's all violence but no blood.
Right.
Violence but no blood, and then there may be like a little scratch on their head or something, and then that's it. But
Now,
it's like,
could it also be that the Pirates of the Caribbean movies were the ones that really like expanded Disney's hold over cinema? Those being
Or was it the Country Bears?
the Country Bears. Oh man, God, those things creep me out. But
more than Haley Joel Osment, because he's in that too.
Well, yeah,
Or Christopher Walken.
That's
Christopher
interesting.
Walken.
You mentioned okay, it's because The Sixth Sense is the closest thing you can come to a movie for adults on this list, but it is
Wasn't that
rated
kind of like
PG.
one of the last Touchstone? Because like Touchstone, they kind of stopped doing Touchstone movies. I think that was actually a Hollywood Pictures movie.
Yeah, I think you're right. I
They
think
kind
you're
of stopped doing like the Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures like late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I
and then
remember the
now everything's all
Touchstone
Walt
period
Disney now.
being
They
like
don't
about
do
10
R-rated
years
movies.
between
They
85
don't do
and
R-rated.
95.
They don't do R-rated movies at Disney anymore, as far as I know.
I'm
They're all
not seeing
PG-13.
anything. The only thing I saw, the M. Night movies are here. Signs, which is PG-13,
Everything's PG-13 at the most.
and Oz the Great and Powerful. As far as, well, you know, that's it's considered live action, but
They
it's
don't
very
do
much-
R-rated movies. Now, that's not to say that
Yeah, the only
there
movie,
might not be some
number
sort of
50
special Marvel R-rated like they do like the Punisher
Although,
or something. But
isn't it unusual though? Because I believe Spielberg is making movies for Buena Vista now, right?
no, he's doing it. It's this weird thing where he makes movies at DreamWorks, and then they're distributed. That's the only thing that Touchstone distributes is DreamWorks movies. It's this weird distribution thing, like because I've seen like a few DreamWorks movies, like say like Lincoln, or that one that he did, Bridge of Spies, and be on on cable. It'll start with,
But it shows
Touchstone.
them as being distributed by Buena Vista.
So wait a minute. Are you telling me that if DreamWorks were to come out with another Shrek movie, it would essentially be owned by Disney?
Not owned, just distributed.
Jesus Christ, man!
Well, they're probably going to get
It's a
like,
freaking monopoly now.
if they're distributing, they're probably getting half of the profits.
They're probably getting some piece of it, yeah, but they're just distributing. They signed some sort of last minute Now I think that DreamWorks has now been completely dissolved, so that might not even be the case. They got bought up by Paramount and things like
You think
that.
DreamWorks
So
is over? Or DreamWorks?
I think DreamWorks has. I'm going to look up DreamWorks right now, see what it is, because
I'll look
it
that up.
was always hanging on the edge. As of October 2016, DreamWorks films are marketed and distributed by Universal Pictures, so they no longer do them under the Touchstone label.
So does that mean like Spielberg's next movie will be
Spielberg's next movie, I don't even think he makes
He will
movies.
go
I don't
home?
even think he makes movies at his own damn studio anymore. He's freelances. I think he does movies. I think like at Warner Brothers. And
So he'll go
things
home.
like-
He'll go home to Universal. How about that?
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, everything's at Universal now. Yeah.
So on the list, I mean, I see a lot of films here that, the National Treasure films, of course. Those are kind of meant for adults. I don't really see kids.
I
being
always
interested.
wondered why they never made a third one, considering it made so much money. Could it have been Nicolas Cage and his weirdness? It has to be.
the top 100 earners for Disney, only 2 of them are R-rated. Good Morning Vietnam and Pretty Woman, and that's it. Everything else is PG or even G.
And remember, they're both Touchstone, which isn't around anymore. So
right. To wrap this up, I want to go back to those numbers again. $55.632 billion in revenue for 2016. This Disney is only going to get bigger, and eventually, I can see, like, if MGM could hold on, because MGM is existing on its libraries, Disney will make a bid for MGM and take all of that. And then, like a great white shark, all it does is swim and eat and just, make little sharks, to quote Dreyfuss in the movie. But I think I may have heard that there were whispers of a Warner Disney merger.
Oh God.
I heard something about that. Now I could be wrong about that, but
dude, that'll be big if that happens, dude. That would be freaking.
That would be.
Huge.
They'd be half of everything then, or maybe I'm thinking of I know Warner Brothers just bought up like AT&T or something.
I would not surprise me if Disney bought out Donald Trump.
Yeah. Can you buy him off so we can have the president?
Yeah, right.
I do now. We might as well. We'll wrap it up with a discussion of Laserdiscs. Now, where did and also CED, which is very interesting for Disney.
Now here's something. Disney's first video releases were actually on MCA DiscoVision.
Yeah, They were like these sort of very small, like Chippendales, kind of like very small, like their cartoon collections for like a year. It was like it wasn't Treasure Island or something, and
Kidnapped.
Kidnapped. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
So what are we looking at after DiscoVision dissolves? Where do they go from there on Laser Media?
Okay, here's what I know. So there's a little bit of a break after DiscoVision because there's no more DiscoVision, and then they start releasing them. It's kind of like about when they start releasing their movies on tape. When they finally because remember they sued Sony and lost, so. Eventually, they start releasing their movies like in the early '80s, and that's when they start popping up on Laserdisc. So you'll see like those sort of Walt Disney like clamshell disc thing or clamshell tape things that Geno had with that sort of the white, and then it has the Walt Disney, and then it has that kind of like orange stripe thing going across it. You'd get that on a Laserdisc, and it would look basically the art would be generally the same. It might be like a black hole might be in stereo. And like things like that, and it would be released like I think early '80s, and then of course they had their Japanese release, and maybe we talk a little bit about this because you had this another conversation about this movie, Song of the South. You can get that in Japan on Laserdisc. That's like one of the most prized Laserdiscs you can get now. Is a Song of the South Laserdisc. Could usually run you can get it for like maybe $150.
You want to know something? You want to know my favorite part of the whole explanation was? Disney lost a lawsuit.
Yeah, they did. So they sued, and they actually them and Universal got together, and it was called the Betamax case, and they basically sued Sony and said, "You're stealing our money by making these things," and then the court said, "No, you're not," and this is. And then I think that they ended up working out some sort of royalty thing with blank tapes, much like they did with audio cassettes. And it's so funny because even though they fought him tooth and nail, Disney is the company it is today because of all of their movies and all of their library and selling all those tapes to kids. I mean, they basically created a whole generation of kids, kind of like Geno. Like they just love Disney.
It's what Disney is? Disney is an MGM that succeeded. MGM was a classic filmmaking entity, and they were synonymous with high quality, big budget musicals, color, and everything that they did, but made a lot of really bad decisions. But the thing is, Disney made a lot of bad decisions too. It's just that Disney had, like Warner Brothers, it had different revenue streams. They had the amusement parks.
Those parks funded everything.
Yes.
Disneyland and Disney World.
Even in lean years, they were doing well.
They always did well. They cranked out like cheap movies in the 70s, but they always made money. It was kind of like, it's kind of part of the reason that George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney was because his original idea of Star Wars is, we'll make it. His original budget was like, we'll make it for like $7 or $8 million, it'll make $16 million because
Right.
all these Disney movies always make at least $16 million.
Yes.
We'll make a nice, tidy profit, and then I can go on to my next experimental movie. And of course, it didn't really work out
It
that
didn't
way.
pan
but
out that way. It wound up being
that
enormously
was kind of his
successful.
original plan. And
Lucas
that's
sold
why
his
he sold it
soul.
to Disney. He's like, yeah, that's why he sold it to Disney, because he was like, well, I was kind of trying to make like a fun kind of kids Disney movie originally, so it seems like a good fit. And honestly, it is. Because what they do is they give money to Lucasfilm. They give money to Lucasfilm to make these movies. Now, they're having weird behind-the-scenes issues with, like, they're making a Han Solo movie and they had to fire the directors.
Right.
And then they replaced them with Ron Howard, who will probably do a very solid job.
Yeah.
They just fired the director of Episode 9 that they had hired, who I don't think was actually, like, qualified to direct it.
Wait, hang on. What was that guy's name again?
Colin Trevorrow.
Okay, yeah. Okay, they fired him?
They fired him because they're still in like the script stage, and they were like their visions were not matching, but they didn't want to do like a Rogue One where they reshot like half the movie like almost before it came out, or like with the Han Solo movie where they were shooting in the middle and it really wasn't working out.
You know, if I were Colin Trevorrow, I would have been like, I'll do whatever you ask.
Well, it was too late. And so now they're gonna. My theory is, and this is sort of like what they're thinking. They're gonna just hire the director of Episode 8 because they had no problems. His name is Ryan Johnson,
Right.
a director of Looper. I don't know if you've seen that with Bruce Willis.
Heard of
And
it.
he's done Episode 8. That's coming out
Why
at
can't they
Christmas.
just get like JJ to come back? I mean, he
They're
knows what he's
thinking
doing.
perhaps JJ, but I don't think JJ is a good fit for that, just because he probably wants to do other things.
Yeah.
Because he came in to do. He kind of had a job to do when he came in and did Force Awakens.
Right.
He kind of had a job to do of, I need to reestablish Star Wars. That was like his mission, and he did. Now, some could argue of like what his choices were. I think it was, while it's not the best movie and it's not the best of the series, it was exactly what the series needed to move it forward.
Well, as much as I intensely dislike J.J. Abrams and incredibly jealous of
It's
him,
Godzilla.
I think
he
he's a
was the
very
one who did the
talented
Godzilla,
man.
right?
He's not the one. No, Godzilla was the guy who did Rogue One. Was
Oh
Gareth.
yeah,
Gareth Edwards.
That's right. Hey, I got a question. Do you think that the fact that Disney now owns the Star Wars franchise, do you think that now that they own the franchise, do you think that they'll finally release the holiday special on DVD?
Why not?
Well,
Why
you know,
not?
George Lucas is like still disowns it, but he doesn't really have any say in it anymore.
He doesn't have any power over that one, no.
But I have a feeling when they finally come out with that omnibus box set of the original movies and their original cuts, which they will eventually come out with at some point, who knows when it'll come out?
Oh my
but eventually
God.
it'll be because there's demand for that.
I want that.
It will be this omnibus box set, and they'll sneak it in as some sort of like Easter egg that you can find. That'd be my guess.
Oh, that would be great.
But the thing is, you don't really need it. We live in the world of the internet. You can literally go on YouTube and it's there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm just saying in a nice high quality format, you know.
you know what? The funny thing is, it was shot on.
It was
even
shot on
the best.
It was shot
It
on
was
video.
shot on video.
You
It was shot on video and then with film elements.
There is
but it was a lot of it
certain
was shot on
thing
video.
to
So
do.
you know, it'd be the best quality you could get would be slightly better than what you can get on YouTube, because the YouTube version is like a cleaned up good VHS version, and so it'll be. Even like the good equipment in the 70s was not that great. It was just a little above VHS quality anyway.
Let's wrap up this episode. This has been two Davids and a Geno walk into a bar.
Yeah.
Show 118. I'm going to do my Bernie Sanders impression. This was the mouse that roared. We were talking about Disney. And I want to thank Geno. Thank you, Geno. This is a really enlightening discussion. The video is fantastic, and this
It's
really
fantastic.
it lends a certain amount of legitimacy to, because me and David are just not we're not up on our Disney, but you are, and
No,
I
that's
knew
you. Yeah.
I knew that it would all come together for you with this Disney show.
And I'm gonna say here, I hope I come back when you guys finally cover Radon. That'll be fun.
He's talking about Radon Video, which was kind of like they actually operated out of my kitchen here about 20 years ago. That's what they were here with their video machines, and they were like, "Who are you? What are you doing here? What do you live here?" Huh?
They would design the posters, and then they would shoot the movies afterwards.
Yes. She's got to have big boobs. Okay, but thank you for tuning in. And Disney is a monster that will never go away. It is a mouse that has been mutated past any stage of actual health consideration, and it will one day devour us all. Thank you for listening.
And I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. Bye-bye.
You've been around all night, and that's a little long. You think you got the right, but I think you got it wrong. Well, can't you say goodnight so you can take me home, Mickey? 'Cause when you say you will, it always means you won't. You're giving me the chills, baby, please, baby, don't. Every night you still leave me all alone, Mickey. Oh, Mickey, what a pity you don't understand. You take me by the heart when you take me by the hand. Oh, Mickey, you're so pretty, can't you understand? It's guys like you, Mickey. Oh, what you do, Mickey, don't break my heart, Mickey. Hey, Mickey.
Turn that shit off, man. What's wrong with you, man? Get the other record. Damn. High five,